The cold evening air carried a gentle breeze as Daniel stepped off the last bus. A warm smile spread across his face. His heart was light, his mind at ease. Tonight was supposed to be special. The weight of the long workday had lifted the moment he thought about home, about the people waiting for him, about the warmth that filled those four walls. He had planned a surprise, something small but meaningful, just to see their faces light up. But as he walked toward the familiar door, something felt off. A strange stillness settled in the air. Daniel reached into his pocket for the keys, his fingers trembling slightly though he wasn't sure why. Maybe it was just the chill, or maybe something deep inside him sensed it before he even saw it. The house, usually glowing with warm light by this time, was dark. No laughter, no voices. Just silence. A silence that wasn't comforting, but heavy. He hesitated for a moment, his breath hitching as he turned the key and pushed the door open. "Mom? Dad? Sarah?" he called out, stepping into the dimly lit living room. His voice echoed in the emptiness. His heartbeat picked up, an uneasy feeling creeping into his chest. The house smelled the same, his mother's faint perfume, the lingering scent of dinner from the night before, but something was missing. Something was wrong. His eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement. The furniture was in place, the photos on the wall still hung neatly, and yet, it felt as if no one had been here for hours. He took slow steps forward, his ears straining for the slightest sound. That's when he noticed it. The dining table, set for dinner, remained untouched. Plates of food, now cold, sat in their usual places, as if waiting for a family that never arrived. His heart pounded. His mother never left food out like this. She always cleared the table, even if they were running late. His eyes flickered toward the hallway, where a faint creak sent a shiver down his spine. His breath caught in his throat. He wasn't alone. Someone was here. Or maybe, someone had been here. And then, just as he was about to call out again, he saw it. The one thing that sent ice-cold fear through his veins. Right there, on the floor, near the hallway entrance, was something small. Something familiar. Something that shouldn't have been there. Sarah's favorite stuffed rabbit, its soft white fur now stained with something dark. Daniel's stomach twisted. His hands clenched into fists. And then, in the suffocating silence, a sound. A whisper. Right behind him. Daniel spun around so fast that his breath caught in his throat. His eyes darted across the darkened room, searching, desperate to find the source of the whisper. But there was nothing. No movement. No shadow shifting in the dim light. Just the eerie stillness of his home that no longer felt like his. His chest rose and fell, heart pounding against his ribs like it was trying to escape. Maybe he imagined it. Maybe the exhaustion from the long day was messing with his head. But no, he knew what he heard. His fingers twitched at his sides as he forced himself to move. The weight of the silence pressed down on him, making the air feel heavier with every step. He picked up Sarah's stuffed rabbit, running his thumb over the fabric, feeling the dried, dark stain that clung to it. His stomach twisted. It wasn't dirt. It wasn't juice. It was something else. "Sarah." His voice came out quieter this time, like he was afraid of what would answer. No response. He turned toward the hallway, the one that led to all their bedrooms. His parents' room was at the end, his own room to the left, and Sarah's. Sarah's was right next to his. The door was slightly ajar, and a sliver of light cut through the darkness. It was the only light on in the house. His palms felt clammy as he reached for the doorknob, pushing the door open with slow, careful movements. The room was empty. The bed was made, her pink blankets neatly tucked, just the way she liked them. Her small desk was clean, her books stacked in their usual spot. Nothing seemed out of place, except for the open closet. The doors stood wide open, as if someone had been searching through it in a hurry. His fingers tightened around the stuffed rabbit. Sarah never left her closet open. She always hated how dark it looked inside. A sharp chill ran down his spine as his gaze landed on the floor. Right near the closet entrance, barely visible against the soft glow of the nightlight, was a single shoe. Small, red. The kind Sarah wore just this morning. But where was the other one? A lump formed in his throat. His brain screamed for him to run, to get out, to call someone. Anyone, but his feet refused to move. He took a step forward. The floor creaked beneath him, the sound sending a jolt through his body. He reached down, picking up the tiny shoe. It was cold. His fingers brushed against something near it, a piece of paper, folded neatly, as if someone had left it there on purpose. His pulse hammered in his ears as he opened it, eyes scanning the hurried, uneven handwriting. "Don't look for us." Daniel's breath hitched. His hands trembled as he stared at the words. The ink was smudged, the letters almost frantic, like someone had written it in a rush. His mind raced. Who wrote this? What did it mean? The sound of something shifting in the hallway made him snap his head up. A shadow moved, just out of sight. His breath came in shallow, uneven gasps as he turned, stepping back into the hallway. "Who's there?" His voice wavered, barely above a whisper. Silence. He swallowed hard, his muscles tensed. He needed to get out. He needed help. His phone. It was still in his pocket. His fingers fumbled as he pulled it out, the screen lighting up his shaking hands. But just as he went to dial, the screen flickered. Then, it went black. No signal. No battery warning. Nothing. His heart dropped. A floorboard creaked again, this time closer. He wasn't alone. Daniel's grip tightened on his phone as he forced himself to move. He rushed toward the front door, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He needed to get out, find someone, call the police, anything. But as soon as he reached for the doorknob, his stomach twisted into a knot. The door was locked. Not just locked. Bolted. From the inside. His hands shook as he yanked at it, twisting and turning the knob, trying to undo the bolt. It wouldn't budge. His chest tightened. Then, another sound. This time, from behind him. Slow. Deliberate. Like footsteps. A cold wave of dread crashed over him. And then, a voice. Low. Whispered. Right behind him. "You shouldn't have come home." Daniel froze. His body refused to move, his breath shallow and uneven. The voice, it was right behind him, close enough that he should feel someone's breath against his skin. But there was nothing. No warmth. No presence. Just the suffocating weight of the air around him. He forced himself to turn, every muscle screaming at him to run. His eyes darted around the room, searching, expecting to see someone standing there. But there was no one. The living room was just as he had left it. Silent. Empty. His heart pounded. He knew he hadn't imagined it. Someone was here. Someone had spoken to him. He backed away from the door, his mind racing. He needed to think. He needed to understand what was happening. His family was gone. The house was undisturbed, yet something was horribly wrong. The note, the locked door, the missing shoe, and now, this voice. His hands clenched into fists as he forced himself to focus. Maybe his parents had left in a hurry. Maybe Sarah had been taken somewhere safe. But why wouldn't they call him? Why leave a cryptic note instead of a message? Why did the house feel wrong? The air was thick with something unspoken, a lingering presence. It sent chills through him, but he didn't know why. His eyes flickered toward the hallway again. If someone had been in here, if something had happened, there had to be signs. He couldn't just stand here, paralyzed. He had to move. Slowly, he stepped forward, his footsteps barely making a sound against the wooden floor. His throat was dry as he approached his parents' bedroom. The door was shut, which was strange. His mother always left it open, even at night. He reached for the handle, hesitating for just a moment before twisting it open. The door creaked, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. The room was dimly lit by the moonlight streaming through the curtains. The bed was unmade, blankets pushed aside as if someone had gotten up in a hurry. His father's watch sat on the nightstand, his mother's reading glasses beside it. They had been here. But now, nothing. Daniel stepped inside, his fingers brushing against the bed. It was cold. No warmth. No sign of recent movement. His stomach twisted. Then, his eyes landed on something near the closet. A small pile of clothes. Sarah's pajamas. Neatly folded. Placed on the floor, right next to a stuffed bear she had since she was a baby. His hands trembled as he knelt down, picking up the bear. It smelled like her. Like the lavender shampoo his mother always used for her baths. But why was it here? Why were her clothes here? A sudden sound made him jolt. Footsteps. Not from the hallway. From inside the closet. Daniel's breath hitched. His grip tightened around the stuffed bear. He stared at the closet door, slightly ajar, shadows shifting just beyond the opening. Someone was in there. His pulse hammered in his ears as he reached out, his fingers grazing the wooden door. He swallowed hard, then pushed it open. Nothing. Empty. Just rows of clothes hanging neatly, shoes lined up in perfect order. There was no one inside. No one hiding. But then, why did he hear footsteps? He exhaled sharply, stepping back, his mind clouded with confusion and fear. The house felt like a maze now, every corner holding a question without an answer. He needed to get out. He needed to find his family. As he turned to leave the room, something caught his eye. A reflection in the mirror. Not his own. A figure. Standing just behind him. A shadow that shouldn't have been there. His breath caught in his throat as he whipped around. Nothing. The room was empty. But he knew what he saw. Something was here. Something that didn't want him to leave. Daniel's breath came in short, uneven gasps. His pulse pounded so loudly in his ears that it drowned out everything else. The silence of the house, the wind outside, even his own thoughts. He squeezed his eyes shut for a second, forcing himself to breathe, to think. He couldn't fall apart now. He had to figure out what was happening. He had to find his family. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone again. Maybe the signal was back. Maybe he could call someone, anyone. But as soon as he pressed the power button, the screen remained black. No response. It was as if the battery had been drained completely. A shiver ran down his spine. He had charged it just before leaving work. There was no reason for it to be dead. Something was wrong. The air felt heavier now, thicker, pressing down on him like invisible hands. He took slow, careful steps back into the hallway, his mind racing. There had to be a clue, a message, something he had overlooked. And then he heard it. A faint tapping sound. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Coming from down the hall. His throat tightened as he turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Sarah's bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, just as he had left it. But this time, something was different. The light inside flickered, casting shifting shadows along the walls. The tapping continued. Daniel swallowed hard, forcing himself forward, his legs heavy as if wading through deep water. The closer he got, the more the air seemed to thicken, suffocating him with something unseen. He hesitated at the door, his heart hammering. The tapping had stopped, replaced by something else. Breathing. Not his own. Shaky. Uneven. Just beyond the door. He pushed it open, the hinges creaking in protest. The room was exactly as he had left it, except for one thing. The closet. The doors were shut now. Daniel's stomach twisted. They had been open before. Wide open. He was sure of it. His grip tightened around Sarah's stuffed rabbit. He took a slow step forward. Then another. The air inside the room felt colder, enough to make his skin prickle. He reached out, his fingers just inches from the closet handle. His breath hitched. A whisper. So close. Right behind the door. Daniel. His heart stopped. The voice. It was his mother's. Soft. Fragile. Almost pleading. His knees nearly buckled. He hadn't heard her voice in hours. Maybe she was inside. Maybe they were all inside. He grabbed the handle, heart slamming against his ribs. With one deep breath, he pulled the doors open. Nothing. The closet was empty. Darkness stared back at him, swallowing the weak light from the night lamp. His mother wasn't here. No one was. Daniel stumbled back, his breath ragged. The whisper, it had been real. He wasn't imagining it. He wasn't losing his mind. A sudden crash from the living room made him jump. Glass shattering. A heavy thud. His pulse skyrocketed. Someone was in the house. He spun around, sprinting down the hallway, nearly tripping over his own feet. As he reached the living room, he skidded to a stop. The coffee table had been overturned, broken glass scattered across the floor. The picture frames on the wall hung crooked, some missing completely. The air felt charged, electric, as if something had just passed through. And then he saw it. The front door. Unlocked. The bolt had been slid back. Someone had done it. His chest heaved. Was it an invitation? A warning? A gust of wind pushed against the door, making it creak open slightly. The night stretched beyond, empty, silent. He hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to leave, to get help. But then he heard it. Soft, faint, from somewhere inside the house. Sarah. A quiet whimper. His blood ran cold. She was here. She was still in the house. He turned away from the door. He couldn't leave. Not yet. He had to find her. Before whatever was in this house found her first. Daniel's body tensed, every muscle wound tight as he listened. The sound had been soft, barely more than a whisper in the stillness of the house, but he knew what he heard. Sarah. His little sister. She was here. Somewhere. His heart pounded as he turned away from the open door, stepping deeper into the house instead of out. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to run as far away as possible. But he couldn't. Not without Sarah. The living room felt colder now, the broken glass on the floor reflecting the dim light like scattered stars. He stepped carefully, his breath shaky. The house, his own home, felt like a trap closing in around him. Then, another sound. Not a whimper this time. A giggle. Soft. Playful. Coming from the kitchen. Daniel's skin crawled. His sister never laughed like that. Not when she was scared. Not when she was alone. His stomach twisted as he took slow, careful steps toward the sound. The kitchen lights were off, but the faint glow from the street lamp outside seeped through the window, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. He hesitated at the entrance. Something felt wrong. Then, movement. A small figure sat at the dining table, barely illuminated by the pale light. Sarah. Daniel's breath caught. She was there, sitting perfectly still, her tiny hands folded neatly in her lap. Her hair was slightly messy, her red dress wrinkled as if she had been lying down before. Sarah. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. She didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there, staring at something on the table. Daniel stepped forward, his pulse hammering in his ears. He was just a few feet away now, close enough to see her face. Her expression was blank, empty. His chest tightened. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Sarah, it's me, he tried again, his voice softer this time. It's Daniel. Are you okay? Still, she didn't move. Didn't acknowledge him. Then, slowly, her lips curled into a small smile. But it wasn't warm. It wasn't the smile he knew. It was wrong. Cold. Hollow. Daniel swallowed hard. Where's Mom and Dad? She blinked. Once. Slowly. Then finally she spoke. They told me to wait, she said softly. His stomach dropped. Told you to wait? He repeated. Who did? She tilted her head, her gaze meeting his. Her eyes. Something about them made his breath hitch. They did, she whispered. The lights flickered. A shadow passed behind her. Daniel's body went rigid. His eyes darted toward the movement, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. The air in the kitchen felt heavier, pressing down on him like an unseen force. Sarah, we have to go, he said, his voice barely steady. He reached for her hand. She pulled away. Why? She asked. His breath hitched. Because it's not safe, he said. Come on, we have to find Mom and Dad. Sarah's smile widened, but there was no joy in it. They're already here. Daniel's blood ran cold. A floorboard creaked behind him. He turned so fast that his vision blurred. His heart slammed against his ribs. The hallway was empty, but he could feel it. Something was there. Watching. Waiting. A low whisper filled the air, barely audible, like wind slipping through cracks in the walls. He spun back toward Sarah, but she was gone. The chair where she had been sitting was empty. His hands clenched into fists, his breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. He hadn't looked away for more than a second. She couldn't have just disappeared. Panic clawed at his chest. His eyes darted across the kitchen, searching, desperate. Then, soft laughter. From the hallway. His pulse thundered in his ears. Sarah's voice. But it wasn't right. It was layered. Like someone else was laughing with her. Or through her. Daniel took a shaky step back, his body screaming at him to run. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not until he knew the truth. Daniel's breath was shallow as he stood frozen in place. The laughter echoed down the hallway, soft yet chilling, slipping through the shadows like something alive. His hands trembled as he clenched them into fists, forcing himself to move. Every step felt heavier, like something was pulling him back, urging him to stop. But he couldn't. He wouldn't. Sarah was still in the house. His heart pounded as he stepped into the hallway. The dim light flickered, casting strange, shifting shadows along the walls. His eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement. Then he saw it. A small figure at the end of the hallway. Sarah. She stood with her back to him, completely still. The sight made his stomach tighten. Something about the way she was standing, too rigid, too motionless, it wasn't right. Sarah, he called, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't move. The air around him grew thick, heavy, almost suffocating. He took another step forward. Then another. His pulse hammered in his ears as he reached out, hesitating just a moment before placing a hand on her shoulder. She turned, and everything inside him went cold. Her eyes were wrong, dark, empty, as if something else was looking through them. Her lips curled into a slow, unnatural smile. They want to see you now, she whispered. Daniel's breath hitched. Before he could react, the lights flickered again, then cut out completely, plunging the house into darkness. A sharp, icy wind rushed past him, sending shivers down his spine. The air filled with whispers, overlapping voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He stumbled back, his chest tightening. "Who's here?" he demanded, his voice shaking. A sudden noise. Footsteps. Heavy. Purposeful. Coming from behind him. Daniel spun around, his body tense, but there was nothing there. Just darkness pressing in on all sides. The air was thick with something unseen, something he could feel but not touch. Then, the whispers stopped. Silence. A suffocating, unnatural stillness that made his skin prickle. He turned back towards Sarah. She was gone. His stomach dropped. His pulse roared in his ears as he frantically looked around. "Sarah!" he shouted. A sound behind him. Breathing. Close. Too close. He turned slowly, his heart in his throat. A figure stood in the darkness. Not Sarah. Not his parents. Something else. It was tall, its form barely visible in the dim glow from the window. Its presence made the air feel thick, as if the very house was holding its breath. Daniel's body went rigid. He wanted to run, to escape, but he couldn't move. The figure took a step forward, and the shadows around it seemed to ripple. Then it spoke. Low. Whispered. "You shouldn't have come back." Daniel's body turned ice-cold. The voice was familiar. Too familiar. It was his own. His breath hitched, his mind spinning. What do you mean?" he stammered. The figure took another step forward, and in that moment, the dim light from outside hid its face. Daniel's own face. Staring back at him. Pale. Expressionless. Eyes hollow and dark. He staggered backward, his chest tightening. His mind couldn't make sense of it. It was impossible. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Then, everything around him shifted. The walls seemed to stretch, the air thickening like a dense fog. The house blurred, distorted, as if reality itself was unraveling. Memories crashed into him. The note. The voice. The feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just wrong. It wasn't real. A sharp, agonizing pain shot through his head, and suddenly, he was falling. The world around him dissolved into darkness. And then, silence. When Daniel opened his eyes, he was no longer in the house. He was outside, standing in front of his home. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over everything. The house looked normal, undisturbed, as if nothing had ever happened. His breath was unsteady as he turned, his mind reeling. What had just happened? Had it been real? A dream? Then, his eyes landed on something near the front door. A single piece of paper. His stomach twisted as he stepped forward, his hands shaking as he picked it up. One sentence was written in familiar handwriting. "You were never supposed to leave." Daniel's breath caught. His chest tightened. And in that moment he knew. He had been here before. And he would be here again. Daniel stood frozen, the note trembling in his hands. His heart pounded in his chest as his eyes scanned the familiar handwriting once more. "You were never supposed to leave." The words felt heavy, like they carried a truth he couldn't quite grasp. The house in front of him stood still, bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun, looking nothing like the nightmare he had just escaped. No broken glass. No eerie whispers. No shadows lurking in the corners. Was it all in his head? Had he imagined everything? The air felt different now. Lighter. Calmer. But something deep inside him knew that what had happened wasn't just a bad dream. It had been real. Somehow, in a way he couldn't explain, it had been real. He turned slowly, his mind racing. His phone was still in his pocket. He pulled it out, fingers shaking as he tapped the screen. The battery was nearly dead, but it still worked. The time showed 6:47 a.m. Had an entire night passed? It didn't feel like it. His first instinct was to call someone. Maybe the police, maybe a friend, but what would he even say? That he had walked into his own home, only to find it trapped in some strange, impossible nightmare? That his sister had been there, but not really? That he had seen something wearing his own face? No one would believe him. He swallowed hard and looked back at the house one more time. If he stepped inside now, would it still be the same? Or would it pull him back into whatever had trapped him before? A movement caught his eye. Down the street, just past the edge of his driveway, a small figure. Daniel's breath caught. Sarah. She stood there, half hidden behind a tree, her red dress catching the early morning light. She wasn't smiling now. She wasn't giggling or whispering. She just stared at him, her face unreadable. His stomach twisted. "Sarah," he called, his voice hoarse. She didn't respond. His feet felt heavy as he took a step toward her. She didn't move, didn't blink. Then, just as he reached the end of the driveway, she turned and walked away. Not hurried, not scared, just walking, as if she knew exactly where she was going. Daniel hesitated for only a second before following. His heart pounded as he moved down the street, his breath shallow. Sarah was small, but she moved with purpose, turning the corner ahead without looking back. His legs burned as he picked up his pace, desperate to catch up. When he turned the corner, she was gone. The street was empty, quiet. Daniel's chest rose and fell rapidly. He turned in a slow circle, scanning every inch of the sidewalk, the houses, the trees. There was no sign of her, but something was there. Something was watching. He could feel it. His breath came in short, shaky gasps. He took a step back. Then another. His whole body screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move fast enough. Then, the wind shifted. A whisper curled through the air, barely more than a breath. "See you soon." Daniel's blood ran cold. He turned and bolted, his feet slamming against the pavement as he sprinted back toward his house. His lungs burned, his mind racing with 1,000 questions he didn't have answers to. By the time he reached his front door, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely fit the key into the lock. He shoved the door open, stumbling inside, slamming it shut behind him. His chest heaved as he pressed his back against the wood, his heart threatening to burst from his ribs. Silence. The house was exactly as it should be. The morning light streamed in through the windows, casting soft shadows across the floor. Nothing was broken. Nothing was out of place. For the first time, it felt normal. But Daniel knew better now. He wasn't imagining things. He wasn't dreaming. Something had happened. Something was still happening. And it wasn't over. Slowly, he looked down at the note still clutched in his hand. The paper felt cold, too cold, as if it had just been pulled from ice. The words stared back at him, unwavering. "You were never supposed to leave." His fingers curled around it tightly. A deep, unsettling realization settled in his chest. He had come home expecting warmth, expecting safety, expecting normal. But whatever he had stepped into last night, it had been waiting for him. And somehow it still was.